So I wanted to do kind of like a follow up or like a part two to Patsy Ramsey, the deep dive that we did for her to try to understand a little bit more about her personality. And so this is from the Vanity Fair article. And again, we're going to look through this a little bit deeper. It's a pretty long article, but I love it. But just to kind of pick out some things about Patsy to kind of better shape her personality. And so the article that I think, the part of the article that I think is important kind of starts here where it says 79 Ramsey's caught a glimpse, Ramsey talking about John, caught a glimpse of a beautiful 22-year-old brunette in Atlanta and pursued her. 2 years earlier, while a journalism major at West Virginia University, Patricia Ann Paul had been crowned Miss West Virginia and had won a talent award for a dramatic reading at the Miss America pageant. And kind of talking about, it mentions the name Marino, and Marino, can't remember his first name, but he is a gentleman who seems to know John and Patsy intimately. He was mentioned in an article with the Daily Camera. And so I say that to say that I think he might be somewhat of a legitimate source, maybe. So we'll see. And he and Jeff Merrick. So in 1980, they were married in Atlanta's Peachtree Presbyterian Church. At 37, Ramsey was 14 years older than Patsy. Couple settled into a modest Cape Cod house in Dunwoody section of Atlanta. Ramsey ran his own company, Microsoft, from the house, and Patsy worked alongside him. So when I was mentioning that Patsy was his ace, it makes sense. Patsy was alongside him. She was his Jackie Kennedy, sort of like a backbone. And that's why I say, like, Patsy, we're looking at Patsy in the context of and understanding that what Patsy was willing to do. We saw all through high school and all through college, her graduating, I think, was magna cum laude with distinction. Like that's a level under, which the highest level is summa cum, but the second highest level is magna cum laude, and that's you graduate within the top 10 to 15%. And so we're kind of seeing the sort of work ethic, the drive that Patsy had. Again, starting from high school, Patsy had an uptick. You know, she was I started in middle school. My mom is really driving us in this pageant scene. But I start to have an uptick every year. I'm a sophomore, I'm doing this, but the next year I get better. I get into something in freshman, sophomore year. But then, and I get to know the school, I get people around me, but then I start to get in positions to where I can actually start asking for things and receiving them. That's a different mindset. That's a shift in mindset. Something somewhere told you that you can go out for something and you can actually achieve it and win it. So if I'm going out for these pageants, I'm in this pageant, I'm in this competition, and I'm going out for this theater competition, I'm going statewide, I'm going nationwide, because I think I can do it. So then as I get to those levels, there becomes this propensity to perform on that level, to go into character. It becomes a part of me. I'm hardworking, I'm willing to do whatever, and I am sort of putting my talents on display. This is Patsy Ramsey. And so when I come into, and I have people have compared me to Jackie Kennedy and saying, for John, this is who she was. For John, she was that person, that glue, that fit. So when John started to run his own company, Patsy was, and at the time she was 22, 23. This guy is 35, 37, right? So John, he knows how to guide her. Let's call it guiding. Let's call it guiding. He knows how to guide her. And so he says, babe, I need your help, you know, with this company. And she really believes in John. He's a handsome young man at the time or what have you. She really believes in John. This guy knows what he's doing. And there's an appeal there. There's an appeal from John to Patsy. You know, this guy he talks a good game. Sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He has his master's degree, so he's educated. He's a veteran, so, you know, he's done that. That's an appeal for Patsy. Like, right off the bat, I got this guy who's ambitious and entrepreneurial. He is suave. He's nice looking, right? And he's intelligent. And he knows how to treat me. and I like him. And it might have just been based on the fact that, I like the guy. And I think they said he was driving a Porsche or something like that. I mean, not going to turn that down. So she's helping John run his company. Although Don and Nedra Paul were able to raise their three daughters, Patsy, Pam, Polly, in the middle class town of Parkersburg, West Virginia, both had endured hard scrabble childhoods. And when we look at this is what I was wondering: what kind of environment did Patsy grow up in? Hard scrabble childhoods. That makes sense because the look on Patsy's face here, this look, this smile tells me that this is a young lady who is grateful to have what she has. But this is this look tells me, this face tells me that this is a young lady who knows what she's supposed to do. You know how you can train kids to sort of, and some kids get it. They just get it, right? If you are trying to raise a kid and you are a single mom or something like that, or you're a single dad and you're like, I got to go to work, take care of yourself, keep the door locked, don't let nobody in. And you sort of, you whatever you train that kid in, they know how to cook, they know how to clean, they know how to take care of the house, they know how to take care of their siblings. This looks like somebody who has internalized all of those things. You can see it on her face. And this is a modest smile, but you can place this person in a scenario to where Nedra or Don say, Patsy, you got to get this. That's just the way it is, Patsy. And Patsy says, I get it. I get it, Mom. I get it, Dad. I understand. Not to say that she likes it all the time, but I get it. I understand. And so from there, when mom says, Patsy, we got to go. We got to do this. Patsy's up doing it. And Patsy never complains. So if I hear Pam or Polly complaining, then it's like, hey guys, look, this is Mom and Dad love us very much. Patsy is that kind of person. Mom and Dad love us very much. They're only trying to do what's best for us. They're trying to help us, have the best, But, Patsy, you always stand up for Mom and Dad. You always this, that, and the third. You always say that they're, and Mom hurt me and Dad said this to me. I didn't like it. Yeah, but they're only trying to help us. And so this would be the one who excels and says, man, whatever money I can get, whatever position I can work into, she sees and seizes the moment to change her circumstance or her situation. Because, and let me go back to my other article. Both my parents have gone through hard scrabble childhoods. If we estimate backwards, Patsy was born in 56. Patsy was born in 56. And if Patsy was born in 56, and we estimate Nedra had Patsy, Patsy was the firstborn, and we estimate that Nedra had Patsy at 20 years prior, that'd be 1936. Now, we assume that Nedra had Patsy at 20. She could have had Patsy, she could have been, and that would have placed her birth date at 1936. She could have been a little bit older, which would have placed her closer to 1930, maybe something like that. So just to kind of get a better count, be a little bit more accurate, they wanted to see. So we got the grandmother here, some of the photos. This is Don. This is Nedra. And obviously here you see JonBenet. You see Nedra again here with Burke and JonBenet. Nedra kind of smaller. And then you kind of see Nedra Reimer July 5th of 32 to 01. And then Donald Ray, I think he ended up passing away in 2020, but he was born in 31. She was born in 32. Okay, so I was thinking about age 24. Age 24, something like that. Yeah. Okay. At any rate, July 32 or July 5th of 32 in Ellenboro, Ritchie County, West Virginia. Died March the 2nd of 01, age 68. So this tells us a little bit. As Patsy was either getting ready for the deposition or she was going through the deposition, her mother was getting ready to pass. So she was going to, and it's funny because, you know, in some of the biggest moments of this case, there's some sort of turmoil going on around that they're having to deal with. Like, I think through we show it in the 48 hours, documentary, which had taken place or aired, I think in like October, something like that. I can't remember the exact date, but Patsy she had just had the flare up of ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer had come back. And so she was doing the 48 hours interview while being a woman who was presently dealing with ovarian cancer, the flare up of ovarian cancer again. And so just to kind of catch the timeline accurately so we can be more accurate. So the deposition of JonBenet Ramsey, Daily Camera shows us the text of the John Ramsey's deposition. Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Wood, Mr. Rawls, Mr. Ramsey, or Miss Ramsey. I am Patsy Ramsey. Mrs. Ramsey, December 12th, 01. Okay, so if Nidra passes away in March the 2nd, then they're doing this some months after her mom has passed. And so Patsy is dealing with the loss of her mom during this period. But taking a brief look at the life of Patsy, Patricia Ann Paul was born on December 29th, 1956 in Parkersburg Wood, West Virginia. Father Don was 25 and her mother was 24, Nidra Ellen. She had at least one granddaughter, died on June 24th in Atlanta, St. James Episcopal, Marietta Cobb County. Okay, switch to Nidra real quick. So, brief life of Nidra Ellen. She was born on July 5th, 32, Ellenboro, Ritchie West, Virginia. Father Orville Blaine, 36. Her mother, Faye Drusilla Brannon, was 32. She was married to Donald Ray on May the 28th of 55. So we know Patsy was born in 56. Okay, so they get married in 55. So about a year and 7 months later, they welcome Patsy in. Okay, that's interesting because that's like the gap between when John Ramsey met Patsy and then they were married. That's kind of the gap we estimated. So parents of at least one granddaughter. She lived in Ellenboro in 1940. In the United States in 1940 and Atlanta in 01. She died on March 2nd at the age of 68. I think in the same, so she was buried in the same cemetery as Patsy. So they have a family plot that they all got together. So shows you how tight knit this family is. They all got together, did like a family plot. So when John engrafted into this family, he really engrafted in. Whoever John was, he was able to get everybody on the same page, or maybe it wasn't John, maybe it was Patsy, who had the hard sense of family, was able to get everybody on the same page and say, hey, we all need to buy a plot of land. I guess maybe if we look a little further, we can see John Ramsey's parents and see if they're buried in this plot of land. Maybe we should look up Donald Ray, see where he's buried. Okay, Donald Ray, he was born on 31st of 1931, Cairo Ritchie, West Virginia, to Lloyd Eugene Paul, was 25, and his mom, Roxy Jane Ross, was 21, married Nidra, May 28th, Glenn Ritchie West, lived in West Virginia in the 40s, Parkersburg in 05. His occupation, he was an engineer and manager. Whatever, he died on May 13th. He was 89, and St. James Episcopal Cemetery. Okay, cool. I was wanted to kind of see also where exactly John Ramsey's mom and dad were buried, to kind of see if this was an entire family affair. And kind of looking at this, some pictures of John Ramsey's dad. Some elements of John's face there. Looks a little like his dad. Kind of see the headstone. Mary Jane, his mom. And then with under the same headstone, just kind of degraded a little bit. This is his dad's portion of the headstone. And this is kind of talking about them getting married, Mr. and Miss Mary E. Bennett. Oh, yeah. This is the mom. Yeah, so this is the mom's side, because I thought it was interesting that JonBenet is his mom, is John Ramsey's mom, and his name is JonBenet Ramsey. So he kind of took his mom's name, but just made it a middle name at any rate. So I thought that was interesting to kind of keep her name and then to keep his name going. But anyways, so birth in 1916, he died at age 76 in 92 in Florida. He was in Florida. I think that's kind of close to Tampa Bay. Glendale Cemetery is where he's buried, though, in Okemos, Michigan. So he was born in Iowa and then kind of hung around that area. Humana Hospital, a native of Des Moines, Iowa, served as director of the Michigan Aeronautics Commission for 22 years, retired in April of 79, which is like a little bit of time after his wife died. John's mom died, because I think his mom died in 78. He talks about in his book how his mom died and then he got divorced. And so it kind of, again, dealing with all that calamity around that time. And so he had a Porsche or something like that around that time. He had a Porsche when I think Patsy met him. But he was recently or newly divorced, which is interesting. Blah, 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 blah. Jeffrey Scott of Atlanta, 2 sons. Okay, let me just finish this. He received the experimental aircraft. Blah, blah, blah. He is survived by his wife, JonBenet, and Jeffrey Scott. Okay, I was wondering when I was looking and I was seeing Jeffrey Scott, and I was like, why do they keep tying Jeffrey Scott to Burke And to John, when I would look up something about John and Burke, they would say Jeffrey Scott. And I was like, who the heck is that? But apparently that would be Burke's uncle and JonBenet's uncle. Okay. So we know that this was a Paul thing, a Patsy thing for them to all be buried in Georgia. JonBenet's in Georgia. Don is in Georgia. Nidra is buried in Georgia. I think JonBenet is in Georgia. I think John will be in Georgia. Burke will probably be in Georgia. But his dad is in Michigan, and the mom from Nebraska. Okay, looks like we got that picture here. This is going to be John. This is going to be Jeffrey. This is going to be the mom. Okay. And then Mary Jane. Boom, boom. That's hers. Then obviously going to show the full size. Age 59, she dies March 17th of 1968. And of course, John was going through the divorce at the time. Member of St. Catherine's Episcopal and Kappa Alpha Theta sorority. Survived by James D. Ramsey, Jeff Scott of Stevensville, and John B. of JonBenet of Little Burn. 5 grandchildren. Her mother, Miss Inez, St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay, and 1 brother, Robert Bennett. So on and so forth. Service will be held. So on and so forth. Interment will be Glendale Cemetery. Okay. So I'm guessing she was also buried died in Lansing, and they took her up to Okemos for the Glendale Cemetery. So that's where she's going to be, or that's where she is. And she was in 78. Okay. So essentially, this was a Paul thing. So it's kind of getting back to the analysis of Patsy. I guess getting back to my original point, I wanted to see just how tight-knit the family was, but enduring hard-scrabble childhoods, Nidra and Don would have gone through the Great Depression. I think the Depression started in 1929, lasted somewhere up until 39 or 41, which is a transition period into World War II, I believe. And I think, if I'm just thinking just out loud, it sounds like that transition into World War II would have brought about opportunities for jobs. What about an uptick in opportunities for jobs? This is where you're going to get the run on some of the runs on the bank that you saw, the Bonnie and Clyde kind of stuff. All of these, you're going to get people like John Dillinger, Babyface Nelson, of course, Pretty Boy Floyd, Machine Gun Kelly, and I think somewhere around there, you may have had, let me see. Yeah. I was thinking that you may have had Al Capone, possibly, during that time period. So Don and at least, I would assume that Don and Nidra, not only Don and Nidra, but John's parents as well, James and Mary Jane also kind of grew up during that period, seeing these things, and so their motivation coming out of the Great Depression and into coming through the Dust Bowl and then into the World War, the second one, they kind of saw the hardships that were there, and so the feeling is you get into the traumatic feelings of trying to take advantage of whatever is there in order to make a better life for yourself, in order to sort of stay away from this kind of calamity and never letting this calamity ever happen again, is essentially what we see when we come over here. And so rescued by the GI Bill, Don obtains his college degree. He goes into Union Carbide. Marino says that, and we'll see a little bit more of Jim Marino a little bit later on. I think his name is Jim Marino. Nedra saw Don as a great white knight, which is interesting that he might say that, because he said, what we'll see, he said, I don't know, I'm not here speaking, and he was on Geraldo's show. He said, I'm not here speaking for the Paul family. I'm here speaking for the Ramsey family because I know John. But he says here, he's making a comment then on the Paul family, though. In contrast to her laconic husband, wiry Nedra was driven and relentless, determined to see that her daughters enjoyed the good things. And so she used pageants as a opportunity for prosperity. So no doubt when we think about Patsy would have taken this into account for her own children, that this is something that I would like to pass on to my kids. So this is going to be the background for Patsy to say, okay, let's do pageants as a way to kind of mold my child and mold my daughter. What do you have for a son? I don't know. That's John's job, but for my daughter, this is what I have. So moving on, in 1984, by the mid-'80s, John Ramsey he's working with his father-in-law, so on and so forth. Patsy saw to it that both of Ramsey's daughters from his first marriage were given coming out parties. And so she's trying to sort of involve herself at 23. She's trying to involve herself in the lives of, or 25, in the lives of John's daughters. And so at that point, and not only does she involve herself, I think she's at, in 1984, if I got my numbers correct, she's about 28 years old in 1984. Patsy is about 28 years old. And at this time, if you have Melinda, who was born in 72, you have Beth, who was born in 69, you have John Andrew, who was born in 1976. You have Melinda at this point. Patsy's 28 in 1984. Patsy's 28. Melinda is 12. Patsy is 16 years her senior. Elizabeth is 15. Patsy has 13 years on her. John Andrew is 8. And Patsy has 20 years on him, roughly. Lucinda, called a contemporary of John, was in his class, was a classmate, I think at MSU. So at that case, she was probably born, she's a classmate, she's probably born somewhere between 42 and 44. John was born in 43. She was probably, we can place Lucinda somewhere between 42 and 1944. So today she's roughly between the age of 80 and 82. And so at the time in 1984, she was probably between 40 and 42. So she's 12 to 14 years Patsy's senior. And so she's looking at Patsy as this young lady kind of coming to take her place to take care of these kids. And so she's probably looking on, wondering like what this 28-year-old is going to do to take care of my kids. And she doesn't even, have kids of her own. How is she going to take care of my kids? But I don't know, maybe John's got it. of somehow, some way. But anyways, Judith Phillips, she's an attractive photographer, meets Patsy in 84. Patsy's working for her husband's company. They become friends. And family is, in order to be friends with Patsy, you have to accept her family because they're such a big part of her life, especially her mother, says Phillips. Sometimes Nidra was obnoxious, said things that were out of line and shocking. But the woman is unbelievable in her loyalty toward her daughters. That's interesting. That is interesting. Okay. Hang on to that. Sometimes Nidra would be obnoxious and said things that were so out of line and shocking. So out of line and shocking. That is coming from Judith Phillips. Okay. I'm going to hang on to that one. I need to keep that one. You're going to see soon. You're going to see soon why you're going to see soon why I need to hang on to that one. So, Patsy was involved. Patsy and I were roughly the same age, drawn to each other, although differences. Patsy was pro-life. I was a feminist. Patsy was involved in Atlanta's Junior League and a ladies' who luncheon charity called Society. And up until her son's Burke's birthday, she worked. Phillips says Patsy had very expensive tastes. She had 18th century artwork and exquisite antiques. John was very expensive, had classic tastes when it comes to his clothes. He liked his toys. He had a boat named Miss America and a plane. Okay, going to leave it right there and move on. But the Junior League, to kind of see Patsy's interests, Junior League of Atlanta, still alive and well today. An organization of women committed to promoting volunteerism, developing the potential of women, and improving the community through the effective action in leadership of trained volunteers. Its purpose is exclusively educational and charitable. That is in Atlanta, Georgia. Found in the Peachtree Papers. Latest issue in the Peachtree Papers. Because it's interesting because I think Patsy was in the Junior League as we've shown. Yeah, so involved in Atlanta's Junior League. And Patsy, as we've shown before, she was very big into, I think, volunteering. Very big into kind of volunteering her time. So I'm going to move on to the next article that I wanted to kind of work through. And I'll probably work through it relatively quickly. I'll probably try to look at it in some greater detail later, but just really quickly, I want to go through a couple things I highlighted. Let me see. And I'm pulling from here. This is Women's Magazine, and Patsy, profile on Patsy Ramsey in April of 1996. Big ups to Reddit. You know what I'm saying? Reddit, to the Reddit sleuthers on this one, man, because they really came through. So I'm going to read some of the excerpts here, and this is kind of what it looks like, just in its original raw form. But obviously you can't see this, but I'm going to read it in its original raw form. So probably want to say shout out to Ghost Storm for kind of finding this article. And then shout out to Police Verso 1 for kind of transcribing this into something readable. So let's go through this. Okay, so the parts that I wanted to look at is the green portions. Okay, so Patsy is saying she's responding to questions, and she said, "I've intentionally chosen not to participate in anything that requires evening meetings," says Ramsey. "That's the time my family really comes first. Whether we're dining in or out, dinner time is set aside to review everyone's daily activities and talk things over. She goes on to say, being a mother and mentor to my children is the most important role I will play in my life, she says. It is certainly the most difficult job I'll ever have. Going down, she says, we really can't give 100% in so many different areas, and often something suffers. Many times it's the woman's health. So this is in 96, several months before JonBenet is killed, which sucks. That sucks. Talking about giving so much to your children and then you lose one of them. That sucks. I don't care what happened. That sucks. But her health did have an issue, as we know, in 93, 94. She did have that issue with cancer. But I also wonder, when she says something suffers, do relationships suffer? I guess is one of my things. Do your relationships or your ability to kind of interact with your kids, are those relationships well balanced? I know we want to say yes, but realistically, I don't know. Goes on and she talks about getting a job coming out of college. Her job with Hayes also put her in charge of special events, trade shows, and in-house advertising. And that was kind of based on her technical skills. She won first place in an international technical writing competition. So we know she knows how to write. She did that when she made product instruction manuals. So one of her software manuals was responsible for, and she won first place in her international technical. So she can write. And that carried over from high school. She can write. She is a woman of many, many talents. And of course, thinking about her career with an advertising agency, John got his master's degree in marketing. And so her and John probably connected on that. And so after cancer, at the top of her list, was working to improve relations with family and friends. I will say this. Ultimately, Ramsey found strength to do a lot more than fight cancer. And John notes that he talks about that, I think, at least in his second book, or in his solely authored book, or the book that he wrote, that Overcoming Grief or something like that. He talks about that, and we'll go through that, but he talks about that a little bit just to make sure. And I'd love to find time to paint, she says. Somehow I always think I'll get to it during the summer when we're in our cottage in Michigan, but it hasn't happened yet. And so she's trying to look to find time to paint. And so with the second chance, Patsy Ramsey plans to enjoy each day and live for the moment. She's doing more than sustaining herself and her family. She has a favorite quotation by Edwin Markham that she truly lives by. It is destiny which makes us brothers. None goes by his way alone. All that we send into the lives of others comes back into our own. So I highlight that to kind of highlight sort of the interest in poetry and art, in being a creative. And so that kind of concludes that portion. And then I want to go into John's book to kind of close this down. I want to go into John's book to kind of see more specifically how he describes her. Okay, and so with this, I'll probably close it down after this. So to kind of get a bigger picture. So says her mother, and this is in John's second book. Make that bigger for you. Okay. It says her mother, and this is the other side of grief, I think it is. Yeah, the other side of suffering. I'm sorry, the other side of suffering. Says her mother, and it never occurred to Patsy for a minute that we might be putting our child in harm's way by entering her in the pageants. Nedra, I guess to our knowledge, has been doing this for a while with Patsy. And so we don't necessarily know. And this is written in this second book, but we don't necessarily know if it was the Pageants that did this. If it's an inside job, then that's not, and it's a family that is intimately known, as Nedra will tell us, as she says. But and then we'll see. If it's somebody that's intimately known, then it's probably not a pageant. You see what I'm saying? It's probably not the pageant that had anything to do with it. It's somebody that knew JonBenet outside of the pageant, and if they had anything that they wanted from JonBenet, then it started well before the pageant. Well before any of that. It wasn't the pageant that got a hold of him. It was like, you know what? Now that I see JonBenet in this light of this pageant, then you know what? Now I want to do it. Had nothing to do with that. So, anyways, her mother and sister saw JonBenet as a future Miss America. Hang on to that. They helped they helped coach and train her and created her costumes and hairstyles for the competitions. Pageants were something Patsy and her family were familiar with, enjoyed, and were experienced in. Both Patsy and her sister Pam won the Miss West Virginia title on different years. They had participated in beauty pageants since juniors in high school when growing up in Parkersburg, West Virginia. Patsy had never forgotten the thrill of her participation in the Miss America pageant. She took JonBenet with her to a Miss West Virginia reunion in '93, and that's when she had, I believe, the cancer. So she was trying to fight it. And after seeing her mother on stage, JonBenet wanted to be just like her. She was an extroverted child and simply loved performing. She took part in her first dance recital held at Boulder High School Theater, tap dancing with 4 other little tappers and singing to the Beatles recording of I Want to Hold Your Hand. Watching her from the front row, I was flabbergasted. Good heavens, where'd she ever learn how to do that? I asked Patsy, who sat there beaming. It was not an easy time for Patsy. She still had the cancer threat looming over her, and she wanted to have something special she and JonBenet shared. Something she could teach and give to her daughter, and besides, she didn't know how much time she had left. John, pageants are a good opportunity for little girls to learn poise and to develop their talents. It'll be our mother-daughter experience she'll always remember. So clearly we can see that, obviously, as we said before, and we were looking at Nidra, do that for her daughters to kind of set the stage for prosperity and sort of like a meal ticket out of poverty, in a sense. Patsy is kind of carrying that through. These are her values. These are her morals. We can see that Patsy is wanting to, Patsy is elevating. She says, hey, man, you know what? I have this cancer thing. I just want to live life. I just want to live life. And not only do I want to live life, but I want to take my daughter with me to this 93 reunion, right? I want to create that bond. So everything that Patsy is doing prior to this saga with her daughter being murdered, Patsy is involving more of her daughter. We don't see a lot of issues with the bedwetting or anything that Patsy might be mad about, and honestly too, we don't see a lot of anger coming from Patsy. We don't see a lot of, and I know this is John telling the story. This is John painting his wife in a good light. But we don't really see John talking about Patsy going crazy in a sense. I know Burke described the psycho, but then he came back in his younger days, but then he came back later and said, no, my mom wasn't really like that. But anyways, moving forward to the next one, make that a little bit bigger, kind of getting to her last days here. Okay. April 2006, we were on a plane to Hawaii, and remember we talked about that interview that she did in Hawaii when she passed away. We're on a plane to Hawaii, and this is out of the same book. On our way to speak at an Easter service at Hope Christian Fellowship Church in Honolulu, Patsy's battling the last days of her cancer. The flight attendant wheels the beverage cart down the aisle and pauses at our seats. Something to drink? She doesn't recognize us. Patsy sits leaning forward in her seat. I order cranberry juice for both of us. Patsy tries to appear normal. She lifts her head and smiles a faint smile at the flight attendant, who hands her the plastic glass. Patsy's hand shakes as she reaches for the glass. I know I shouldn't lift my hand to do it for her, just like I shouldn't help her with things that she insists on doing herself, working a zipper, carrying her purse. This morning back in Atlanta getting dressed, she couldn't reach her feet to pull on her shoes. She sat slumped at the edge of the bed, her new beige shoe with the strap across the instep in her hand. Honey? Yes, sweetheart. Let me get that for you. And I was wondering, I wanted to know How did things deteriorate? And I guess I went to see because I said, she looked this way on the interview in Honolulu. She looked fine. What happened in 2 months? And so we see from John's perspective, John is telling us, well, actually behind the scenes, this is what happened. So he said, I joked with her about buying complicated footwear. Her condition was going downhill. I knew that. No, I knew it and I didn't know it. She was still here. She was still Patsy, my Patsy, and we were still together. I believed we would beat this cancer because they had beat it before. He documents it like the first time that they just went through it and how they just, everything they did to kind of like really, overcome that. And so this is kind of his second attempt talking through that and saying, hey, let's try to beat this thing together. He said, I believed we would beat this. We were going to go on with our lives together. We would travel to Hawaii to give our testimony, be an encouragement to people. John, isn't this wonderful? Isn't it wonderful? These Christians want us to come and speak. See, there are those who believe in us. Yes, Patsy, it's wonderful. I touched the softness of her arm. I try to breathe deeply. Patsy, we have a life together. You and I, a future. We're above the world in this plane and we're flying to Hawaii. Let's think of this trip as a second honeymoon. Let's thank God for this experience. The lights in the cabin dim for the in-flight movie to begin, a murder mystery, not something we put earphones on to watch. We lean back in our seats hoping for sleep. But as I allow the monotonous sound of the cabin to overtake me, I can hear Patsy's labored breathing. And I know, and I don't. I turn to see her face, her eyes pressed tight, mouth and jaw set in pain. And I can only imagine sort of the pain that she's going through in flight with the labored breathing. Cause I don't know, when I fly, every now and again, I'll be fine. But then all of a sudden out of nowhere, I'll kind of lose my breath a little bit. And I'll have to take deeper breaths in and just kind of keep that in. And so I don't know if Patsy was also battling that while battling this cancer thing. And so she's clearly in pain from this, and that just sucks. My hand moves for her face to gently touch her cheek. Her eyelids relax, her shoulders soften. The painkillers have kicked in and my fingers reach the smoothness of her skin as she drifts off. My index finger wipes away a bead of sweat. Or is that a tear? So I guess she may have been crying when he touched her eye, or and I don't even know if it was the painkillers had kicked in. I think it's possible also that the pain squeezed her and she just tensed up without even thinking about anything around her. But when John touched her, and oh man, my husband, I'm trying to be strong. So, I'm becoming aware that my husband is watching me. And so they go on to kind of speak, at the churches. And so John is talking through, they're at the interview. And again, we're going to watch this interview. But John is talking through the interview. They go through the interview. The TV interview concluded, and in spite of her weakness, Patsy stepped down to talk with people in the audience. She stood and chatted for nearly an hour. And it's funny because she needed his help getting up. Getting up the stairs to go in there. And as they were going up, she was talking to him, what do you think these people are going to think about us? And do you think these people are going to hate us? And people are going to judge us? And the article, and I'm going to show this, the article on the other end that was written kind of talked about, there was a mixed emotions about it. And so on the other side of Patsy and John's side, John is saying that, hey, we were thinking about that too, that mixed emotion. So she stood and chatted for nearly an hour. And then I took her arm and guided her outside where our rental car waited. She fell limp into the seat. John, weren't these people wonderful? She's still trying to talk and act as if everything is okay. Fell into the seat, man. That's extremely sad, man. But she's trying to, keep up the facade because she's weak. She's tired. But she's trying to keep up the facade for him. Sucks, bro. John, weren't these people wonderful? The sky was a brilliant cobalt blue, the sun bright. It was kind of a day a married couple like us should head for the beach together, lie in the sun, walk barefoot on the white sand, have lunch under the palms. But these were leisure activities for other people, not us. Only 2 months. Only 2 months. Only 2 months. And that's what I said last analysis when I was going through this. 2 short months, you know. Okay, let me go to the next one. Says 2 months, page 153, 2 months became 1 month, 1 month, 31 days. And it's like you don't know, but it's like you see her in pain every day. Patsy beckoned to me from bed where she was reading, and so they get home, and this is where they are. She was reading our mail to share a letter from a woman in Canada. This woman is saying how touched she was by JonBenet's story. Listen to this. JonBenet has affected the lives of many more people in her 6 years than many of us strive for in a lifetime. Patsy's face softened and smiles. Oh, John, I would sure like to think that's true. Our little Johnny B, we knew she would be very special in this world, didn't we? She paused, but not like this. Oof. Patsy, she is special. This letter illustrates that we probably don't know the half of it. Yes, honey, but do you think she accomplished her purpose in this life in her 6 short years? I don't think I can answer that for sure. She was quiet for a moment, then said in a positive voice, John, I'm not afraid to join her. I'm so looking forward to seeing her. Man, and you know, when people start talking, when people start talking like that, man, that's the beginning of the end, bro. You know, that's when they start to give up. And it hurts because it's just like, man, this was John's ace. This is my backbone. And no disrespect to Cindy, no disrespect to his first wife. But Patsy was like the one that was supposed to go the distance with him. She was molded, I think, for him, he thought. And when she says something like that, and she's weak, she's battling this, there's something about, there's something crazy about kind of seeing this sort of death over somebody. It's really, it's almost like sometimes it becomes a foregone conclusion, and you just kind of see, just this energy around a person. It's just like, no matter if you pray, no matter if you send good vibes, there's just this energy around them that's just like, this is it. You hear the coughs, you hear the hacking, and it's a different sound. The cough has a different sound. That like, man, this is not good. Something's wrong. And those are the last days. And so she said, I'm not afraid to join her. I'm so looking forward to seeing her. I know. And John comes back and says, I know, but I want you here. And it's like, what do you say to that? What do you say? Like, I want you to stay with me. I understand you're in pain. I understand what's going on, but I would like to keep you here. So she took my hand and stroked the palm. She said, and this sucks. This part hurt me. She said, John, we're going to have to find you another wife. Look, man, I know that hurt him. I know that hurt him. He was describing when he lost JonBenet, he was describing it as, I think in one of the books, like a Clydesdale, kicked him in the stomach or something like that. He said, I know that drop in the stomach, because we're not talking about divorcing. We are talking about I'm about to lose my wife. And then she turns to me and she starts saying these things like, I'm not afraid to go see her. We're going to have to get you another wife. And so John says, no, thanks, but I'm happy with the one I've got. And she says, well, I'm just saying, Patsy. And he says, don't. And so every day we prayed for a miracle. Every day her condition grew worse. Yeah, that sucks. Moving on, said 2 weeks earlier, her doctor took my arm, and some of you guys were asking whose decision was it to kind of take her off of the meds. So 2 weeks earlier, her doctor took my arm, set me down mid-morning, and the sun had just invaded the room through the cracks in the window blinds. The humidity and the heat steamed the lawn and the walkway outside. John, it's time to consider palliative care, hospice. He said, hospice. He said, And the doctor responds, says, we're going to make her as comfortable as possible. I'm so sorry. More chemotherapy and radiation treatments would just be torture without any benefit. John says, I confess deep down I recognized with each reoccurrence the battle was getting more difficult. In this last battle, our weapons were of no use. The chemotherapy and radiation treatments were having no effect, and her condition deteriorated fast. Now she was in agonizing pain and no longer able to comprehend what was going on around her. He talked about, I think it was the first time or the second time. I think the first time they were in this sort of, when they came to Maryland, and they went to Annapolis to this little breakfast nook or something like that had like a hotel or something like that. And Annapolis, I know where Annapolis is. It's in Maryland, and they went to Bethesda. I know where Bethesda is. I have a friend over there, an acquaintance over there. Been there a few times. And so Annapolis, anyways, but basically Annapolis is kind of like a smaller town, I would say. And so they're basically in this smaller town praying for healing, and really, and this is where this energy of him wanting things to happen comes into play, and wanting things to turn around is because when they were in Annapolis and in Bethesda, and they were trying to get all these treatments and go through everything that they could do. I think he was saying, I think it was the first or second time. I might be getting confused, but anyways, when they were going through that, they were praying for things to go well. They were praying for healing. And one time, based on faith, things came through for them. And so he's here like, man, this is going to be it. So I confess deep down, things are getting more difficult. Radiation's having no effect. Now she was agonizing. She was in agonizing pain and no longer able to comprehend what was going on around her. And so now, because she's no longer able, she's in so much pain that she can't even think straight. So now we really, as a husband, you really have to, or as a partner, you really have to start thinking about letting it go, because now she's in pain and it's sliding right through. The pain mans aren't working. I was throwing in the towel and preparing Patsy's death certificate. I knew that. We both had fought this cancer for 12 years. We had won the battle many times, but we were going to lose the war. Couldn't bring myself to tell her that there would be no more chemotherapy or radiation treatments. So the doctor comes in with palliative care conversation, and John doesn't tell her, because I was wondering, I was like, why didn't he tell her? But I guess she was kind of so out of it that it wasn't doing anything anyway. Whether she was taking it or not, it wouldn't do anything. So she was in pain anyway. So now we're going to do everything we could to make her last days comfortable and full of love. Now my gentle Patsy lay a ghostly shell, laboring for each breath. Yeah. She had been my strong supporter in everything I tried to accomplish. Patsy, my vivacious, fun-loving, talented wife, now withered and bald, dying. Hospice nurses told me it was important that I release Patsy from this earth, give her permission to go. Otherwise, she would quite possibly hang on for me and her family. Approaching her comatose body, I whispered in her ear, I love you, Patsy. But Patsy, I have to let you go. It's okay. You can go home. Burke and I will be all right. Death clouded my world once again. The sharp, jagged pains were about to resume. Patsy's hand in mine, still wearing her wedding ring, my bride. I dabbed her mouth with the lip swab and told her once again, I love you. It's okay to go. I stroked her cheek, her forehead. Her heart rate quickened rapidly. The oral medicine I gave her had no effect. Dang. This sucks, man. Because it's just like, if you have a spouse, that you are scared to lose, and it's like, what do? Once you realize the value of your spouse and you're like, dang, man, I can't, if I ever lost this person, I'd be in trouble. I want no part of it. So it's like every time they get sick, it's like, I want no part of this, you know. And like little things like them getting sick, just a common cold, it's just terrible, you know. I knew this was the end. Then suddenly, and just for a moment, her eyes opened wide as if surprised, as if seeing something wondrous beyond me, beyond the room. And with one final release of breath, she stepped into the arms of Jesus. That's interesting. I love seeing kind of stories like that because I wonder what people are experiencing as they go down to death. Like, what are you experiencing? What are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are those moments leading up to that? And obviously not many, you know, many people can't, they can't express that. And so it's up to the people that are beside them to kind of say, this is what I saw, what I observed this person going through. There's an ear-splitting quietness of death, the vivid memory of the last breath, and then the absence. My wife still warm in my arms. You know, and this is where he was saying on I think on Ashley Flowers, Crime Junkie interview, but saying it here for book. He said, Burke, I whispered. He turned his head to me, his eyes squinting in the shard of light from the hallway. Burke, what, Dad? Burke, what's wrong? Sorry, son. So apparently he was in the room with Patsy and Burke was sort of right outside. Didn't want to be there. Didn't want to be in there. And so he says, is it Mom? It's Mom, isn't it? Said, yes, I'm sorry, son. Neither of us could speak. I reached for him, and for a moment, we held each other without words and cried. His mother was dead, and his world was forever changed. Yeah, it sucks, man. Because it's like you're just waiting for something to happen. You're just waiting for something bad to happen. I think that's everything that I want to do on that one. And this is the article that I wanted to kind of reference as well. We're talking about Ramsey's late mother last spoke in Hawaii. Patsy Ramsey was interviewed by an Isle pastor before her death by Craig Gima. And this was, I think he wrote this piece in August. This piece was written in August. And it said, a lot of people still believed they killed their daughter. She said, but you couldn't, or I'll say, few people have had to go through the kind of tragedy they went through, all said. All who still keeps in touch with John Ramsey said the decision to invite the Ramseys to Hawaii was controversial, just as we were saying with John and Patsy, thinking on their side. They were kind of, you know, scared to go in because they knew they might run into another headstorm. So from what that's telling me is that there's an emotional, there's always these emotional headwinds that you're battling. And these emotions are playing. They can make you physically tired. They can physically drain you because there's a tangible connection to the body. And so Patsy's drudging up these stairs and John is dragging her. And she's sort of just, her body is just fatigued. And so a lot of people still believe they killed their daughter, she said, but you couldn't be with them for 10 minutes, still believe they killed their daughter. And this is what I'm saying right here. This is the culmination. You couldn't be with them for 10 minutes and still believe. And you remember when I showed you these pictures, this one, and then I also showed you this one. These are the pictures that caught people. So when we say, you know, you couldn't be with them for 10 minutes because in 10 minutes, this is what Patsy could do to you. But that doesn't stop. Because they're good with people, but that doesn't stop. That doesn't stop what happened. And we don't even have to accuse them of killing their child. You know, we don't even have to accuse them of doing it. But sometimes, you know, people can, I don't want to say put on a show because I don't want to make it seem like they're disingenuous, and whatnot. But I guess I would say that, or I don't want to say that they're disingenuous all the time, but I guess I would say that sometimes you get in front of people and they can put on a show, or they can be so convincing that you can say, how could this happen? And it might not be them that did it. It might be somebody else that, had something to do with something. And so they're having to do all of the press for it. And so when you stand in front of them, like, you just kind of exonerate, or you forget about everything because they're so lovable. And I think that's what people, that's the consistent thing that people say when they say the intruder did it. That's the consistent thing that people say, because they say, man, these people they're so awesome. They're so cool. How could they do this to their child? Well, maybe they didn't, maybe they didn't do it. Maybe they had nothing to do with it. So when you're analyzing this case, you have to keep that in mind. But, this is sort of who Patsy was. She was a fighter. She was somebody deeply devoted to her faith. She talked a lot about, when she was going through her cancer, about Jesus is going to heal me. Jesus is going to do this. John, look right here. It says in the scriptures that, God is going to get us through this. God is going to get us out of this. And so she really talked. Patsy was more of the emotional one. John was more the stone-faced, logical thinker, and Patsy was more of the emotional one, which transferred down to JonBenet. That transferred down to JonBenet quite a bit. Kind of spontaneity, flowing, flying by the seat of her pants. Just let's just do everything. Let's just live this way, John. That's who Patsy was. And I'll close this out by saying, personally, up until this point, I will say that based on this elevation of Patsy and wanting her daughter close, wanting to match, I think it said somewhere in the book that, and we saw a picture of it, and they were all wearing matching sweaters. But I think in the book, they were talking about how, or one of the books, they were talking about how when they did the Christmas in their house, they were, Patsy and JonBenet and Burke were all kind of wearing the same Christmas sweater in the door, kind of waving to everyone and stuff like that. And so Patsy was kind of bringing her kids close to her, loving on her kids that way. And of course, as John said, she just got through a bout with cancer. So number one, I have a second chance at life. I'm not going to let, and many people have said this, when you have a brush with death, certain things don't seem as important anymore. That's number one. And number two, as Patsy elevated, it was in Patsy from her mom's perspective, from what her mom put into her. It was in Patsy to pour into her children, especially the daughter. And that's probably why it could be the case that JonBenet was pulled in more. If you read through some of the, or if you skim through some of the book, because I haven't read fully, I've just kind of skimmed. But what you'll kind of see is a lot of mentions of JonBenet first, from John's perspective, and from Patsy's perspective. You'll see JonBenet is mentioned first a lot of times. And I don't want to say Burke is an afterthought, but Burke oftentimes comes second when in the mentioning process. And so, as John said in an interview, JonBenet was a spark of our life. She was the spark of our life. And that was true. So JonBenet just by nature took up a lot of attention, and I think Patsy and John were pulled into that without even trying. And so that, I think, sets the stage for some things to take a left turn. So that's the end of the analysis. If I find something else, I'll bring it up. But I think that's pretty adequate for where we are now. So that's the video. Let me know what you think. Once again, thank you for all your support and engagement in the comments. Until next time, like, share, subscribe, and take it easy.